Welcome to the High Sensory Mothers podcast with Karen Hunt, a supportive space dedicated to mothers with high sensory intelligence. Each week, I'll share insights from my own experiences and those of my clients, alongside empowering conversations with inspiring guests who offer practical wisdom and guidance. Together, we'll help you embrace your sensitivity so you can thrive, not just in motherhood, but in your life and business too. Hello and welcome to episode 3, Setting Healthy Boundaries as a High Sensory Mother. The last couple of episodes, we looked at embracing your high sensory intelligence, and I talked a little bit about my own journey. And then in episode 2, we looked at the bane of most high sensory people's existence, which is overwhelm. Boundaries is a really important topic. It tends to be something that many of us are not good at, and there's a reason for that. We tend to struggle with boundaries because we're so empathic, because we care so deeply about everything, including other people, that we tend to have an issue with people pleasing, essentially. We're so good at reading other people, we have a heightened awareness of what their needs are. And of course, because we care, we want to give them what they want and what they need. The intention behind talking about boundaries today is just to help you understand boundaries in relation to you being a high sensory mother, and also give you some tools, some strategies, some tips to start implementing to get better at boundaries. So let's have a closer look at boundaries. We could describe boundaries as the invisible lines that separate your needs and feelings and energy from others. Boundaries are really important for us. They're important for everyone, but particularly for us. Firstly, as being HSPs, secondly, as being women, and thirdly, as being mothers. Because without good boundaries in place, it's highly likely that we will suffer with emotional exhaustion and that we will get overstimulated. These can lead to much more serious situations as time goes on. So it is really vital to understand how important boundaries are, and then, of course, how to have healthy boundaries. So let's have a look at the 3 different types of boundaries. We have rigid boundaries when you get to a point where you just can't anymore, you've just had enough. And so you implement rigid boundaries as a way of protecting and defending yourself, essentially. It's created out of a fear of overwhelm. So, you might just shut down and say no to absolutely everything. You can't do anything. You say no to any social situations. You're isolating yourself because you just don't know how to say no in a healthy way. On the other extreme, we have porous boundaries, which means you're absorbing absolutely everything from everybody. You're absorbing other people's emotions. You're overcommitting yourself. You really struggle to say no to anything. So they're basically 2 extremes. And what we're looking for, of course, is a nice healthy boundary somewhere in the middle where there's a balance between connecting with people and protecting yourself. So essentially, you learn when to say yes and when to say no. The way that you get good at that is by really knowing yourself. You've got to have that awareness of who you are and what you need. And it might be difficult for you to really spend that time on self-reflection and truly understanding you so that you're in a position to know when you have to say no and when you can say yes, how to balance your time and your energy, your resources, so that you can achieve what it is that you want, have the connections, the relationships that you want, the lifestyle, the business that you want. I can share a little bit about my journey with boundaries. I didn't know what boundaries were for the longest time, and I really struggled with them. And although I'm so much better at them now, I'm not immune to having a situation where I do a poor job of creating a boundary. The difference between now and years ago is that now I recognize that situation way more quickly. I have implemented so many tools and strategies for myself so that it doesn't happen that often to start with. And when it does, I recognize it quick enough that I can do something about it and shut that situation down quickly before it gets too overwhelming for me. As an example, when my children were at primary school, I had a job, a full-time job, and I also had a business that I was working on outside of that. I got to a point where the business looked like it could take off, but I still needed to keep the job for the income. I was really struggling with that, as the job was something that I took out of necessity to provide for my family. I took a job with a company that was of interest to my husband. And I think that just demonstrates that I cared so much about what was important to him that I made that decision to work at this company, because even if I wasn't interested in what they did in the area they worked in, my husband was. And so it felt like a good enough reason to take that job. Obviously, in real life, there are lots of complex nuances and situations to navigate. And so it's never quite as straightforward, as simple as that. However, at looking back, I can see that poor boundaries really played a part in that decision. I realized that I needed better boundaries, and it was difficult to implement them. But I did. I transitioned from this particular job into a part-time role where I worked from home some of the time. And so that was really good because that helped me focus on my business as well as still keeping that regular income coming in. What developed later on from that is that I moved to a different place in the country, and I was able to work from the new location from home completely. And so that again was another step in the right direction for me, until finally I was able to leave that job completely. So I learnt that I needed to really look at myself, what I needed, in the context of what my family needed, my husband and my children. And I slowly managed to put my needs ahead. I won't say I put my needs ahead of everybody else, because that didn't happen until much later. It's a very gradual process. Everyone's needs were put ahead of mine, and then gradually mine started creeping up in the priority list. The problem with the way I did things is that I did burn out, and I was exhausted, and it did lead to all sorts of problems and issues within the family. One of the biggest struggles I faced in implementing boundaries was terrible guilt, the feeling of being selfish. I really struggled with that. You may also struggle with resistance from other people. I didn't have that problem, fortunately, but I know a lot of people do have that. So the way I was able to deal with that, again, it wasn't a quick fix. It's taken many years of work. But recognizing how important my health and well-being is and prioritizing that is what's really helped me, because it enabled me to realize how valuable I am and how important it is that I am healthy, and because then I'm in a much better position to help anyone else, whether that's my children or family, friends, clients, or whoever. So let's talk about some common challenges that we experience as high sensory mothers when it comes to boundaries. Certainly, one of the big ones is the emotional boundaries we have with our children, because we are so attuned to them and we can pick up on the subtleties and the nuances. We know them so well and we love them so much that we feel the experiences that they have. And it's both the greatest feeling in the world when your child is happy and joyful and doing well, and the most awful feeling in the world when they're not. It's both. So we really have to make sure we can separate our feelings and their feelings. They are different. We don't want our children to be in a state of stress, and so it's important that we can be their role model and we can be their safe haven. So when they are experiencing a difficult moment, say for example, they are having a wonderful time playing, but it's time to leave, and they're really sad, they're upset, they might be angry, there might be a tantrum, and we have to remain calm. We have to be empathic and acknowledge that they're feeling sad or angry or upset and they don't want to leave. And we just have to keep doing that until they settle and they accept they've diffused their feelings, their emotions, and we can then move on. So it's very easy to say doing that, but when you actually are in that position, sometimes you don't have the bandwidth to do that. And that's the point. The point is that as best you can, you need to make sure that you are fueled so that you can be there for your children when they need you. Because over time, when they need you will lessen, and how they need you won't be as intense. But if they know that they can come to you with issues when they're teenagers, for example, because you were there for them when they were younger, it's going to be so much more fulfilling for you. And you will be demonstrating to them how important self-care is. Because it's tricky when you're observing your child, your teen, displaying behaviors that you don't want to see. This isn't about blame. This is just about awareness. We all do the best that we can. Because we're high sensory, we do tend to put in an awful lot of thought into our decisions, into how we parent, into the pros and cons of lots of situations that we're in. So we really do the best that we can. It's not just an empty saying. It really is very meaningful for us. And of course, with hindsight, we can look back, as I do, and think, if I'd known this, I would have done that differently. But that is part of the journey, and so acceptance is a really key part of that. So please never beat yourself up, because it really doesn't help. All you can do is move forward with the information that you have now, and you keep doing better. As I'm sure you know, one of the most powerful things that you can do with your children when you mess up is to apologize to them. It's amazing how we don't generally in society treat children as people, but actually, when you do, they are so understanding. As long as you're being genuine and you're sorry for what happened, it's a great way to move your relationship forward. None of us are perfect, and they need to know that too. Apart from the emotional boundaries that we need to have in place with our children, there's time and energy boundaries. We tend to feel like we have to be available 24/7. And I think with the internet and social media, that seems to be the case even more than it used to be. But honestly, we do not have to be available to everyone 24/7, including our own children. Even if you've got a newborn, you might need to be available to them 23/7, but not 24/7. Because if you are available all the time to everyone for everything, the cost is overwhelm, resentment, exhaustion, burnout, and so it goes on. It can lead to all sorts of chronic issues. So it's really important that you have a scheduled, or even if you can't schedule, at least try and make time every day for your self-care, whatever that looks like for you. And it will change over time, of course, too. But it's so important. It really has to happen. Another thing is boundaries in relationships. So I mentioned at the beginning that people pleasing is quite common with us. And it just means that you're taking on too much responsibility for other people. They have to be responsible for themselves. You can't be responsible for making them happy. It's all right to put limits on what you give to others. And one of the ways you can do that is by using the pause, and you just take a breath and you ask yourself, is this aligned with my energy and my needs? And you can answer from there. So a practical way of doing that is saying no with kindness. You can thank someone for the invite or for the request or whatever it is, and just say, sorry that you can't do it today, or whatever it is that's relevant. But you can be kind, you can thank them and say no. And one of the things I'd like to mention that I've had to learn is not to over-explain myself. Because we're deep thinkers, we tend to think through things in some detail, and then it's natural to feel like you just need to explain that to somebody. Actually, you don't need to explain that to somebody. You only need to explain it to yourself, and then you can deliver your decision. And that's especially true, I think, if you're saying no to a non-HSP. People generally don't care what your explanation is, and they accept it. Another practical thing you can do is to perhaps, if you can, schedule a particular time every day when you have your quiet time or your rest time or just time without all the stimulation. And just as an aside to that, it might well be that I think a lot of people, not just us as HSPs, but a lot of people are quite overwhelmed because of phones and because of all the notifications and all the channels of communication. So the do not disturb is a great thing to put on a phone, and turning notifications off as well if you can. So that's like in a general sense throughout the day, and definitely having your phone not near you at night or switched off in another room or something like that, so that you don't have that feeling of, am I needed? Am I going to have to be available for somebody for something? You totally need and deserve time to yourself. As an HSP, you need it more than other people. because you process so much more deeply, it means that your energy has depleted more quickly. Like a battery, your battery runs out before a non-HSP. Therefore, you need more time to recharge than they do. If someone does question your availability, your boundary, when you say thanks but no thanks, just repeat it. You don't have to explain, you don't have to go into detail about why that's the case. Just repeat it. Just be calm, be kind, and just repeat it. Another practical tip is your environment. Chaos tends to make us feel overwhelmed. Chaos can come in different forms. I'm thinking of the physical environment that you're in, especially if you've got younger children, depending on the space that you have. It might be quite a messy environment. There might be toys everywhere, that kind of thing. And it's lovely to imagine having a home where everything has its place and it's all beautiful. And I aspired to that when my children were younger. Although I managed quite well to have something I was relatively proud of. When you have more than one child, when they get older, it gets more and more challenging. Perhaps there's a halfway house that you can have, like toys are only allowed in this room, or they're not allowed in one room, or something like that. And you have organized boxes where you put things away. I loved having different boxes and drawers for different things, but that's quite a bit of work. So it might be that you just have a box and everything just gets chucked in. At least you've got a nice, calm environment. Very often what I found was when it came to toys, that less is more. Decide on how you want your physical environment to be to help. It might be that it's noise. It might be that your children are playing loudly and you need to find a way to reduce the impact of that on you. It could be that you have headphones, noise cancelling headphones, a really popular choice for people. It could be, like for me, for example, one of the boundaries I have at the moment is I have a specific time of the day every day when my children are free to call me. Because before that, they would call me any time of the day. And sometimes I couldn't speak to them because I was on a client coaching call, for example, or I was at a yoga class, or I was trying to just get some work done. By setting aside a time every day, I know that I'm ready to expect a call, and they know they can call me then, unless something's urgent. So that helped me feel like I don't have to be on or available 24/7. And I don't feel like that for most people, but for my children, that's the hardest one. This is a way that's working quite well for us right now. Okay, so shall we try something? Shall we try a little exercise to identify and set a new boundary? Think of an area where you're feeling overwhelmed or drained, and identify a small, realistic boundary that you can set this week. You're going to have to work on that wording until you feel happy saying it and you actually believe it. If you can't get to that point, you've got to dig a little bit deeper. You might need to work with a coach or a therapist to help you with that, because sometimes when we want to set a boundary, we realize that there's layers underneath that boundary that we need to address first. But let's assume that either you get some support in this or you can just journal and try and uncover that yourself. Once you've got to that point and you've written down your boundary, then have a look at how you'll communicate it and also how you'll handle any pushback that you might get. So again, you're going to have to work around this a little bit. When you feel like, I've got it, I'm happy with this boundary, I'm happy with the wording, I understand what pushback I might get from it, and I've thought through how I'm going to respond to that. And make sure that you do respond and don't react. And by doing this thought process and working through it in advance, you've got a much better chance of responding and not reacting. And of course, also think about when and in what situation you're going to implement this boundary. You do it at a time where you don't have to implement it right now. And what I mean is, you talk about this boundary at a time where you're not being triggered by the fact that you don't have that boundary at that moment. So if you then get to that point when you're ready to implement this boundary, see how it goes and then reflect back on how that feels for you. How do you feel after implementing this? What difference has this made? Has this helped reduce your overwhelm? What has it done for you? Hopefully, you'll have a positive experience with that, and it will gift you some more confidence so that you can repeat this process. In my journey, it's been many years of doing this work. Maybe you're starting off with healthier boundaries than I did when I started, and it won't take you that long. I don't know your particular situation, but if you would like help, then I recommend a book called Boundaries by Jenny Miller and Victoria Lambert. It's a practical guide for understanding and implementing boundaries. On the cover, it says, "Say no without guilt, have better relationships, boost your self-esteem, stop people pleasing." One of the things that I liked about this book is the idea of saying no with kindness and not guilt. To stop over-explaining, because that's something that I tended to do. Sometimes I'd write a message out and I'd see this long paragraph, and then I'd have to read it and think, they actually don't need to hear all that. It's not of interest to them and it's not relevant. Then I'd reduce it down until it was just a simple sentence and it was fine. So if you do need help on boundaries, there's plenty of books and courses, coaching out there if you need more support. So today we talked about the fact that it's totally normal to struggle with boundaries. And the reason for that really is because of our empathy. But it is important to work on them because we can have deep empathy and good boundaries. It's important to get good at understanding and implementing boundaries for your own health and well-being and for that of your children, because you are their safe place and you are their role model. We looked at the 3 types of boundaries: the rigid, the porous, and the healthy. Just like Goldilocks, we're looking for those boundaries that are just right. We also looked at some common challenges for us as high sensory mothers, the emotional boundaries that we have with our children. The danger there is that it can lead to permissive parenting. We looked at our time and our energy boundaries, because nobody needs you 24/7, not even a newborn. And relationship boundaries. Again, a danger there is just because of our people-pleasing tendencies. So pause before answering. Say thanks, I'll get back to you, to give you time to pause if you don't want to say yes or no straight away. Don't forget to use your Do Not Disturb on your phone, and then you can get back to people once you've had a time to process information. You don't have to give answers in most situations straight away. So get back to them when you're ready. Practical tips that we talked about was this pause, and with kind and assertive communication, the regular quiet time or downtime that you need, and to create the environment that is going to help reduce overwhelm and establish those good, healthy boundaries. I shall remind you again that setting boundaries is something that is really a journey to go on. And lots of these small steps will lead to big changes in the long run. So don't worry, you can do this. You deserve to have the space, the energy, and the peace that you need in your life. And you can totally do that. I hope that was a useful episode for you. And next week, we'll be talking more about using your high sensory gifts in your business. If you've got any questions, if you've got any experiences you'd like to share, I'd love to hear from you. Do get in touch with me through my website or by email. And I just want to leave you with a final thought that boundaries aren't about shutting people out. They're about creating space for you to thrive. And when you set healthy boundaries, you teach other people how to treat you and you honour your own needs as a high sensory mother. Thanks for listening and look forward to connecting with you next time. Bye for now. Enjoyed today's episode? If you haven't already, I'd be so grateful if you could subscribe and leave a quick review. It really does help other high sensory mothers discover this podcast. To stay connected, visit my website where you can sign up to receive episode updates straight to your inbox. Or book a free call if you're curious about working together. Thanks so much for listening, and I look forward to next time when I'll share more insights on embracing your high sensory gifts.